Well, I am taking down my Christmas wreaths today, and while these in front are artificial, those in the back are not. And I also have not only my live wreaths, but also my live Christmas tree that I don't want to end up in the landfill. So today we're going to talk about what do you do with your Christmas tree and your live wreaths after the holidays are over. We're also going to talk about winter care for your boxwood. What do they need? Both container planted boxwoods and also those in the ground. And then finally, we're going to do something really fun, and I invite you to do it along with me. We are going to, for the new year, start out with a gardening risk worth taking, and I invite you to do it or something similar right along with me. And then make sure you stay all the way to the end, because I've got two really fun announcements about some upcoming events. So what do you say, Stuart?
Do it.
First Wednesday walkabout of the year. So let's go along to the back, and I can kind of observe as I am passing through that I have blooms on my ajuga. I even have a bloom on my encore azaleas. They look great. I am prepared. I have on my Cool Job gloves and my high C boots for winter gardening, because it's not so cold now, but boy, was it bitter cold first thing in the morning. So I guess I can start off by taking this sugar pine cone off, and my bells, I'm going to be putting these up. But what I'm really concentrating on today are two things, and those are my live wreaths and my live Christmas tree. So I've already taken it off of the table. I've taken all of the lights off of it. And then Stuart, right here, let's put a graphic right here of the two locations in Oklahoma City where you can recycle your Christmas trees and any kind of live greenery. There's a location on Wheeler, and there's also a location, let's see, where is it? Will Rogers Park, I believe. And we will put a screenshot this up so that you will know where to take yours. But more importantly, they transform this into mulch. And between now and January 15th, you can not only recycle your Christmas tree and your wreaths, but you can also go back and get some free wood mulch. So I think it's really a great deal. Now, my Christmas tree is still pretty fresh. It's not dropping many needles, but boy, some of these wreaths that I had out that were facing south and got strong southern sun, these are really crispy.
Well, you can hear it.
Yeah, you can even hear it. So what I'm going to do is pretend like these are encore azaleas or some of my gardenias from Southern Living, and that they realize something that likes acidic conditions. And then I am just going to slough off a lot of those needles before I take them. And then obviously I will remove any berries. I'm going to remove the pine cones. I'm going to remove the ribbon. And I may or may not save the circle of the wreath, the wire form upon which it was created, because I might want to use that in the future. This large one I probably won't, but I have a smaller wreath form that I probably will. And that's my question of the day. What do you guys do with your live trees, your live evergreens once the season is over? And if they are on a wreath form, whether you made it or you purchased it that way, do you keep the wire form to use in the future for another project? So I've got this one up, this one I'm just going to toss over there, and then obviously I've got some more greenery that, by the way, I thought looked absolutely charming on my raised beds. I thought it really looked fun. I've got a votive candle down, and I loved the way this looked. By the way, all of my decorations inside are already down. So I was waiting for a pretty sunny day to get out here and do this, when I could do not only take down my wreaths, but a little bit of outdoor gardening. And it feels so good. It feels so good to be outside, getting some exercise and working in the garden. So as long as I am here, I am going to check out how my carrots are doing. And yes, my carrots are doing fine. And by the way, if you guys want to know where you can get some wire cloches, I will put a QVC link. These are a little bit different than the ones that are in my collection, but I'll put a link to where you can get some of these wire cloches. And the carrots look like they are doing just fine, and believe it or not, it hasn't really been cold enough for any of this lettuce to freeze out. Now, these in general were gardening risks worth taking because I planted them pretty late into the fall, but as you can see, the Swiss chard is doing just fine. And if it doesn't get too cold, and probably if I mulch this with some leaves, you can see that these greens that have already germinated, they might even make it through till spring when I can harvest them. Definitely the Swiss chard will. Now over here, I noticed this morning, I'm not going to get a lot of production out of this in terms of vegetables, but I certainly got a great return of joy on my investment of planting these purple potted peas, because look, can you pick it off and taste it? Yeah, isn't that fun? Okay, let's.
I love them.
Oh my gosh!
I used to wake up every morning and do this in my house.
Really good. Okay, so there's a purple potted pea. Again, whether or not these endure is going to depend on how cold it gets, but in the meantime, I can enjoy just coming out here, picking a few. You can see over here that I've got, let me show you, here's a really beautiful one. Yeah, look at, and the little flowers are so beautiful. So this is just a fun thing, plus I enjoy looking out here and seeing them growing vertically on the tutor. So that's kind of a fun thing, checking on my cool weather vegetables. Some other things that I checked on as long as I was out here was, are you okay, Stuart? Stuart has to walk backwards, you guys. As I kind of cheated, I wanted to know, Actually, I noticed that for the first time I did have a little bit of squirrel digging, and you guys know my history with squirrels. So I came out here, and where they had dug, I didn't see any signs of any of the tulip bulbs that I planted. But when I dug a little bit deeper, look there. Some of the tulip bulbs are indeed coming up. So I know that they are, it may not look like there's much going on underneath that soil, but there definitely is. So that's what I'm going to be doing with my winter, my winter evergreen decor that is now kaput. And I think we should now concentrate, Stuart, on some live evergreens. Let's talk about winter care for your boxwood. Oh boy, it is cold. Stuart just said, "Ooh, it's cold over here." It's because we're in the shade now. So as promised, let's talk a little bit about winter care for boxwood. Now, first and foremost, you want to plant the right kind of boxwood for the right location, and that kind of depends on your own landscape. But there is a broad category of boxwood that I am definitely very, very excited about. I have told you about them before, and that is better boxwood, the blight and disease resistant category of boxwood that has been in development for 2 years, but now in 2024 they're going to be available, and I believe you can even buy them through Plants by Mail right now. So there are 4 different kinds. There's Babylon, Renaissance, Skywalker, or Skylight rather. I always want to say Skywalker. And Babylon, did I say Babylon? Renaissance, Heritage. Heritage, that's the one I missed. They all have slightly different growing forms, so I wanted to match the growing form to the locations where I planted them. I'm going to have some evergreens, some pots of evergreen boxwood that will cascade up and down these steps after the rail gets in. And by the way, yes, I am still waiting for my handrail. Hopefully it will get here soon. So I'm going to have 4 pots, and in this case, I'm going to use Babylon Beauty, a better boxwood. This one is hardy too, zone 5 to 9. Now, why is that important? Because anytime you are planting container boxwood, you want to make sure that they are cold hardy to 2 zones colder than where you garden. So I garden in zone 7, and these are cold hardy to zone 9. So that makes me feel confident that these will be able to make it. I am going to pot them up once I locate the containers that I want to use to run up and down the stairs, so I will want 4 of them. And the pots are going to be rather large because I want them to be, about 2 times the size of the root ball if I can find them, and a size or a shape, and maybe an urn shape that will fit on these steps. Now, Babylon Beauty, in this case, this one I chose it. It's good for beds, borders, mass planting, also for containers. It will get 3 feet high, 4.5 feet wide, because I want this to not have so much of a topiary look like I had at the other house, but just almost an evergreen hedge that grows up and down the steps. So for this purpose, I am selecting Babylon Beauty, and it will be, I think, really resplendent looking from the direction coming around the garage, but also coming from the indoor down, kind of like an evergreen hedge. Okay, Stuart, do not fall. Do not fall, please. We don't need an accident in the new year. Okay, the second variety is it is Skylight. I always want to call it Skywalker because of Luke Skywalker. Of course, the force is with this better boxwood called Skylight. And I got this one for planting right here because it is going to get taller. It will stay compact from in terms of its width, but it will get 6 to 8 feet high and 3 to 4 feet wide. So that will be great for this location right here, and it will almost provide an evergreen wall over time. Now it's gonna be years before it gets to be that tall, but nevertheless, I wanted an evergreen wall to give me interest against this brick facade, and something that could handle both shade and sun, and that's basically just a tough character. And there'll be drip irrigation along here. Now, it might be ultimately that I think, these are getting too large for this space and they're encroaching onto the path too much. If that is the case, then certainly I can keep them pruned. But the other thing I could do is slightly shift the path, or I could also transplant the boxwood to a different location as they get larger and as they mature. And happily, in terms of boxwood care, boxwood transplant really well. And I think it's best to do that either in spring or in the fall. You can even do it in the winter time, but you know, with temperatures and with climate change, conditions are just so iffy. Today it might be 70, tomorrow we might have a below 70-degree day. So I prefer to do that probably in the winter or in the fall and in the spring. So there's my first 2. Let's take a break here, Stuart, and let's move on to the last 2 varieties. So as I'm walking to the location, I see that I've got another wreath here that needs to be recycled, and because I thought it looked so cute on this little hobbit door, which, yeah, it's not very tall. You do have to bend down to get in. But I liked it so much that I decided that I needed to have another wreath for this time of year that's not quite so holiday and festive looking. So I'm putting the terrain wreath that I had in a different location, I'm going to hang it there on the door. And now let's come over here to this variety of boxwood. Now you can see here, even though I wouldn't say that boxwood really likes acidic conditions, they want pretty much neutral soil, a little bit on the acidic side. So it didn't hurt them at all when some of those evergreen needles were kind of dripped down upon this variety of boxwood, and this is Renaissance. Now, it also will stay relatively low. It won't get higher than about 3 feet tall, and it will get a really nice compact form that will give the shape and the line that I want for these areas that I hope to transform into those little green mounds. So I think it will be perfect. These will kind of grow together, and I will prune them in kind of a cloud shape, and I will then be flanked as I walk this way and that way by this rhythm of boxwood. The other thing that I will like about these Renaissance boxwoods is they will look beautiful against the hydrangeas when they fill out over here, and as kind of a textural contrast to the dragon prince cryptomeria, the pancake arborvitae. So they're all evergreen, and they will grow together into those mounds that I like so much. Now, all of these in the back, all of these boxwood, you'll notice, have no sign of winter burn. They really look great, and that's because this area in the back is largely in shade. And actually, your boxwood prefer to be in mostly shade or some shade in the winter time, because they don't have those varying temperature kind of temperature swings that you get when one is in full sun, as we just discovered, Stuart, walking from sun into shade. There's a big temperature differential. And they also literally get sunburned. They literally get sun scorched. So actually in the back, the boxwood look a little bit better than they do in the front, and that's a good thing because I have a lot of it. Now let's talk about small. You've often asked me about what to do about small potted boxwood, and I'm going to show you what I do with those. Now, as I said, you can grow boxwood in containers in my zone and leave them out during the winter. If you're in a different zone, if you've got different growing conditions, then I encourage you to research your own specific macro and micro environments before you try to do it. But in general, I have found in my Zone 7 garden, I can successfully overwinter them outside, especially if I take certain preventive measures. I use a really heavy, thick concrete pot that won't necessarily crack. I can use a faux terracotta. I can even use regular terracotta if I've treated it, or if I'm okay if I have that terracotta pot for several years, it cracks and then I have to replace it. So you just want something that can really handle the frost. Now, your container boxwood and your boxwood in the ground, and I've got some of both right here. Here is a little Renaissance boxwood, I believe, or that might be, I take that back, that's a little heritage boxwood. And I've got some small ones in the pots. What they all want universally is about, an inch of water until the ground freezes. Now, my ground sometimes doesn't ever freeze, or only small sections of it freeze until way into late January or February. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just making sure that periodically, if it doesn't rain, then I turn my sprinkler system on if I haven't already overwintered it, like some of you may have, and I turn my sprinkler system on just to make sure that they don't go into really, really cold temperatures very, very dry. But happily, we've had not enough, but fairly consistent rainfall that's not been a problem. Okay, so now let's go back to your small potted boxwood. Okay, so underneath this mound of leaves, I have a whole bunch of small potted boxwood for my potted boxwood theater, which in the coming months will either be on these plant terraces. These are part of my QVC line. I will provide a link. This is 4 of them in a round. But also I have some other plant stands. And these, once I feel confident that the temperatures are warm enough, I can unearth them from all of these leaves that are now mulching them, and I can bring them out and I can put them, I think, pretty safely onto the plant terraces. Now, these are not only nestled with lots of leaves around them, and I have more leaves that I'll be kind of dumping on top of them, but they are also nestled in between different things that are growing in the ground, like this artemisia, that little coconut buddleia from southern, one of the butterfly candy, I'm losing my words, candy butterfly. These are all nestled in those other plants that will grow into mounds, so they too will protect them, both their root zone in the container, and then they'll also be protected on top. So that's how I overwinter my small containers. Again, in your area, it might not be the same. So just research it. It takes no more time than just Googling it, or maybe calling your extension center and talking to a master gardener. One more variety that I'm going to be trying before we move to the front, and we talk a little bit about bronzing and winter burn, and that's this boxwood from Southern Living that I would grow simply because I love its name. This is Lucky Charm, and it has foliage that's a little bit more elongated. It's a deeper green than an olive tree, but I love it. This one's even putting out some kind of new growth. I have heard, according to my friend Jim Putnam from HortTube, that it is really, really tough, that I will love it, and so I am going to incorporate it probably into some containers in my garden. So there you go. There's just kind of an overview of better boxwood, how you can successfully grow container boxwood outdoors, and different varieties you might want to try. So let's take a break here and let's go to the front and talk about that vexing problem of bronzing and sun scald. Little pointy hoe outside of my little garden shed. Yes, I know you guys will ask for the link, and I will make sure to put it in the description box below. So, and yes, more work will take place over here. I'm thinking about planting some mondo grass in some of these remaining voids, but that's something for spring. So this is what I am calling a gardening risk worth taking, and gardening in hidden spots and forgotten places. I've got this area that's actually located in the alley, and one of the things I love about the cottage is that you don't see my garage front and center in front of my house, that it's in the back, and the alley basically leads to it. It feels more secure to me. But there's this area along the concrete wall that mostly grows nothing but weeds. And yet, look here, Stuart, this is pretty good, rich soil, because it hasn't been growing anything other than weeds. It really is not. It might be lean, but I don't think that it can't support maybe growing a few things that I seed in here. So I will continue to remove all of the henbit and the dandelions and things like that, the weeds, because in less than probably 10 minutes, I can try an experiment. And that experiment is, I don't want this space to be wasted. And yet I don't want to grow some of the things that I want to grow here, I don't think, in other locations, other areas of my real garden, in the front or in the back. So I've got some hollyhock seed that was gifted to me by my friend Gail Wynn. I've got peach hollyhock, pale yellow hollyhocks, and white hollyhocks. And even though technically I was supposed to plant these in the fall, I ran out of time, and actually we're not that many days beyond the calendar date of really when winter begins, on December 21st, I guess. So I am just going to take some of these hollyhock seeds, and remember, hollyhock is one of those plants that will self-seed at least according to Gail, this self-seeded in her garden very successfully and pretty reliably, so she never really needed to keep planting it because she has a very, very vigorous cottage garden. She would just let some of it go to seed and it would come back every year, or it does come back every year. So I'm going to take some of this. I'm going to put my cool job garden glove on, and I am just going to kind of macerate some of these clumps. But I'm not doing any more prep than this, you guys. I'm not adding soil amendment. I'm not adding fertilizer. I'm not going to supplementally water this. I ain't doing nothing. This is just an experiment. And if I only get 3 of them to germinate, these hollyhocks will get really large. They'll get very tall. They are often grown against the fence. I am hoping that this fence will provide kind of a windbreak and that they'll get enough light here. And then at that point, if they grow well, I can either decide, do I want to relocate them to the front or do I not? So what I'm going to do is in this section here, I'm going to plant all of the peach ones. That way, if they germinate and I get those little telltale rosettes of hollyhock, then I'll know that these are peach if I want to plant them in a certain color coordinated area in the front. This section that I will do later, I will weed it all, do the same thing, hoe it, and this next section I'll do pale yellow, and then I'll end up with white. And then with these leaves over here, I will just gently mulch them to keep them moist. Now, hollyhock seeds, they need some cold to germinate, but they really don't want to be planted too deeply. So I'm not going to plant these too deeply. I am just going to kind of scatter them, and I'm not being really meticulous. This is no stress, no labor gardening. I'm just going to kind of toss them out here, and I'm going to plant them more densely than ultimately they'll grow because I'm not sure. This is an experiment. I'm not sure which ones will germinate and which ones won't, and it's no risk. You know, it's no financial risk because these were all gifted to me. The seeds were free. I can always get more because she's got them growing so prolifically at her home. And so then all I'm going to do is not plant them deeply. I'm just going to kind of rough the soil over. Now I think we are supposed to get some rain on Friday. I am hoping. And if we get some rain, then I will come back out. You never know what you're going to find. This is a 1930s house, so you find all sorts of things. And I can come back and I can plant those other, I guess I'll have a trio of them. If they succeed, they'll grow tall, they'll be pretty. I don't necessarily care if they get really diseased. I can use them as cut flowers, but it's just a fun experiment that will give me a lot of pleasure over the winter thinking about. I need to make sure that I record this in my garden journal because otherwise I may forget. And I also want to remember this is a garden risk worth taking. So I hope you do it along with me. Try any kind of seed. With our wacky weather, as Monty Don says, I just read this passage from him in one of his garden books, just try it. Don't necessarily be slavish about, you know, is this exactly the right time or not? Do you need to give it into additional watering or not? Because basically, weather is so wacky right now, we have not a lot of control. So he says, and I say, just give it a go. Okay, let's talk a little bit about winter bronzing. Now, exactly why that happens, I can't really explain, but I do know that some varieties, some cultivars are more prone to it than other varieties. This one happens to be just a winter green. In my experience, sometimes it has turned bronze like this has. Sometimes it stays green. I think a lot of it depends on the type of sun exposure that it gets. This one was growing in the ground. I topiaried it up. I put it in the pot, and it has been in this pot for years. berms, you'll notice that it's a heavy, heavy concrete pot that has a large volume of soil around it, which will protect it, though I guess it didn't protect it from the bronzing. I think bronzing is also kind of a personal thing. Sometimes it really bothers some people. It doesn't bother me too much because I have found that then in the summertime, in the spring and the summer, it typically kind of reverts or puts out fresh new growth. So it doesn't really bother me. I don't think it's necessarily a sign of illness or disease. It's just a sign of a plant's natural way that it grows under certain conditions. You'll notice that I've got another variety right here. I believe this is a winter gem, and it is not really bronzing much at all. Again, maybe because it's got a different exposure and it doesn't have, it's just not exposed to as much sunlight. There is a problem with this one though that I need to address. Stuart, if you'll come over here, you can see that I had someone transplant this from the ground into this pot for me. And while they may have thought that they got it deep enough, actually they did not.
Oh,
You don't want a plant to be too deeply repotted, but you also don't want it to be too shallowly repotted. Now, sometimes this won't cause much of an issue, but when it's in the ground and you have this much of the root ball exposed, then you'll get dieback on this back side. And you can see here, it's one of the reasons I dug it up and put it in a pot where I could hide its backside, because this was exposed and it then stressed the plant and it died on the backside. So that might be one reason. You don't really want to have a lot of those roots exposed. So in this case, it's going to have the same problem in the pot that it had in the ground, and I need to address that by potting that a little bit more deeply. Now, don't be a little bit over aggressive in immediately assuming that if a boxwood turns brown or discolors, that it is dead, because it may not be really most sincerely dead. It just might have some issues. So, case in point, I've got another boxwood here that was growing on one of the berms, on the main berm in front, and I wanted to relocate it. Now, why would I relocate a dead boxwood? Well, I didn't. This one may look like it's dead because so much of the foliage is discolored, but it's not, because look, it's all green past the about 3 or 4 inches of discolored foliage.
Is it bad that I think it's pretty like this?
Well, again, it's kind of a preferential thing. This may be intense bronzing. I'm not really sure, but I do know that this is not dead, but it did need a more protected location. So we transplanted it here. I'm not going to be pruning it now. I will wait till spring to expose all of that live green foliage underneath and remove some of the browning foliage. It may not also disturb you, Stuart, because it's winter time.
Yeah.
But if it were spring and everything else were lush around it, then it might bother you. Here's another example of a type of topiary that I've got growing in a pot. This is a heavy, heavy concrete pot. This actually came with the house. And as a bonus, look here, Stuart. Look what we've got right here. We have cabbage worms. Even though it got down to 29 last night, look there. These are those vexing cabbage worms. I just squeezed that one. So what you do to prevent this, your cabbage worms, is you want some kind of BT or bacterial thuringiensis, either in a spray form or in a dust form. This tells me that I need to get out some of my dipel dust and put it on there to, I believe I've got that right. I need to check my records that I'm using the right potion. But obviously, even in the winter time, you cannot, well, let's just put it this way. It's important to do your Wednesday walkabouts to see those kind of problems, because I have different cabbages and kales growing in different places. But I digress. So this is a green mountain boxwood that is a wonderful form for making topiary. And this one is also stripped kind of on its backside, not because it was planted incorrectly, but because of an ice storm at the other house. And it is slowly recovering, and I just let it put its best face forward. Now here's a tip. If you go on vacation and you're not going to be home and you don't really care if the best face is forward and towards the sun, then you can just torque your pot so then the ugly part is to the sun and will fill out on that side, because you really don't care if it looks ugly while you're gone. While you're gone, if that doesn't bother you. So that's another tip. And I can't believe there's all sorts of flies and things out here, because it has gotten below freezing, but obviously they have not succumbed. These boxwood over here, which is pretty much a combination, a hodgepodge of different boxwood. I've got Green Beauty, Green Mountain, Baby Gem. These are boxwoods that I've had for a very, very long time, and they all seem to be doing fine here, even without any shade. There's a little bit of winter burn on that largest winter green boxwood, but again, I'm not too concerned about that. I'll have an opportunity in the spring to just prune that off, so that's okay. What is a little bit more distressing is another issue that I've got on the berms coming up to the upper terrace. So let's take a break here and go visit those. Well, all of my boxwood, the ones that seem to be the most stressed are those that are kind of growing on this berm or this little hill, my rolling terrace, coming up to the top terrace. And I think part of that is because of the angle to which they're exposed to the sun and the fact that they are in full direct south sun, which can be very strong this time of year, and they are not in any shade at all. You may recall that at my former home I had lots of shade. The boxwood was, at least at some point, if not all, during the day in shade. Now, I've got one of these Cranberry Creek boxwood that I absolutely loved. I bought, I don't know how many of them this year. I bought them online. But I am noticing that this one has lots of dieback on the back side. Am I sure what the cause of that is? No, I am not. It could be from a number of different things. It could be for irregular and inconsistent moisture. It could be because it was disturbed when I was transplanting some other things. I'm not really sure. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all measures to ensure that none of those things are a problem. I think here it was a watering issue because of the location of a sprinkler head. When I review all of my sprinkler heads this spring, which I will see if that might possibly have been an issue. Now, boxwood really, they don't just want good drainage, they really demand good drainage. So make sure that you've got very good drainage in the ground and you have very good drainage in your containers. So if you plant them in a container, elevate it some. Don't put it in a saucer where the water will drain into the saucer and then just stay there and freeze or consistently keep that root ball soggy. You don't want that. I think this is a problem with moisture. So what will I do? Well, in the spring, I will, as I said, I will check for watering issues. I'll make sure that things are kind of consistent and check for any other reasons I think it might be a problem. But then I will just get out my trusty battery operated pruners from Black & Decker, yes, and I will just prune this off back to where I see live wood. Then hopefully once I address the problem, it will fill out on this back side, and before you know it, it will fill out, and hopefully I won't have to replace the plant. Now over here, and this was a situation that I am going to blame on rapid temperature shifts and very high wind. So I went away for a weekend and all of these were just fine. And this is a combination of all different kinds of boxwood, largely Green Mountain and wintergreen. And all of these boxwood were fine. Switch places with you, Stuart? Yeah, and all of these were fine. And in one weekend I came back and I don't know how many of my boxwood were just brown on the surface. Now, that may have been because some of this was new growth that wasn't tempered to the cold, but I don't think so. I think it was because we had a rapid temperature shift, and I think it was because it got down to probably 25 that night, and then the next day it got up to over 70. And I just think it struggled with that kind of temperature change. And then in addition, we had really drying, desiccating winds. Now, are there some measures I could have taken to mitigate this? Had I thought about it? Yes. I could have sprayed this with an anti-desiccant, something like wilt proof. You could also spray that on your evergreen wreaths and things, and it just prevents transpiration or moisture loss. But I didn't, and I'm not going to be too hard on myself, because I know that in the spring, as soon as I start seeing new growth flushing out, I'll come back and I will just trim off any of that dead foliage, either on these large round balls or on some of the smaller specimens that I planted a little bit later in the spring. Another reason that some of your plants, some of your boxwood may show more stress than others is because they're not established. So they really want to put out deep root systems, and when I say deep, I really mean wide, because they actually have a fairly shallow root system, but it's very expansive. It's very wide in its growth pattern. And those that are established obviously can absorb nutrients, they can absorb moisture much more effectively than those that are newly planted. So I think these are going to be fine, but right now I'm really going to keep an eye on them, because we've got more cold to come, more dry conditions to come, and more high winds. If I think that they just can't endure a hard winter, then I might replace them next spring. But for now, I'm just going to hold tight and prune them later. So there you go, some answers to how to care for your boxwood in your winter garden. I think the optimal time to record in your garden journal what you have done in the garden that day is right after you do it. As soon as you walk into the house and your hands have warmed up enough to write. So today I'm going on to, and by the way, I'm doing this because so many people have asked me how I plan to use the garden journal for my own garden. And so I thought this might be instructive. So I've obviously come to my date. It's January 3rd. And yes, I can't believe it. My first time for me to mess up 2024, not 2023. So I'm going to record this information on January 3rd. Now, I've already checked my weather app, because I always want to record what my high temperature is and my low temperature, and now an additional feature that I just discovered on the weather app. So once you get on your app, and this is just the Apple app, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, it not only gives you UV index, sunset, that kind of thing, wind, but look, all the way to the bottom, it will tell you, is that high temperature for the day above average, below average, or on average. So today we are 6 degrees above average for January 3rd historically. Now, I did not do any gardening on New Year's Day or the day after, but I did take a screenshot of my Apple kind of metrics for the weather, and I recorded those later, but I had them captured, and you can see here that on New Year's Day it was 48 as a high, 28 as a low, and the same thing for January 2nd. We were 2 degrees above normal. Today we're 6 degrees above normal, and I think that trajectory is important to record over time for historical purposes, but also for very pragmatic reasons as you garden. So what did we do today in the garden? Well, I checked my boxwood for winter care. Did any of them need to be watered? Are any of them struggling? Do any of them have winter burn, just like we discussed? So I checked my boxwood, and if I needed to, I watered accordingly. I took down my Christmas wreaths. And I researched where they could be recycled. Now, one thing I am going to do, as I told you, is I'm going to slough off as many of those needles as I can to serve as mulch in my own garden before I take it to the recycling location and keep it out of the landfill. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, what I did today was a garden risk worth taking. So even though technically I should have done this in the fall or in the spring, I'm really, according to the calendar, just beyond fall. So I planted some hollyhock seeds in white, peach, and yellow in front of alley fence. Now, will these germinate? Will they not? Is the gardening risk worth taking? I don't know. But I will have recorded when I did it to know whether or not I might try the same thing next year. There is no loss here. It took me less than 5 minutes. It was fun, and it gives me something to hope for in the coming spring. So when I go back, and if some of them do indeed germinate, I can say, oh my goodness, I can tell you, I planted those on January 3rd, 2024. One other thing I decided to do at the last minute was take an image of what my front yard looked like on this date in time. So cool. So on January 3rd, this is what it looked like. So the pansies were still in pretty good shape. The boxwood had a little bit of winter burn, but nevertheless, this is what it looked like. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I have recorded that for posterity. Now, in real life, I meant to do this on January 1st, but I cheated. Today's the 3rd, but I'm still going to put it on my January 1st entry. Now you say, oh, Linda, but you might be taking up some space from next year. Well, I might, but that's okay, because there'll probably be another date that I missed recording anything, and I can just use that excess space. So if you bought one of these little Ivy printers that prints out an adhesive label of an image that you took from your garden, then you might want to try it, taking a picture of what your front yard looked like on New Year's Day, 2024. Well, hey guys, I just got back from a long walk after we shot the Wednesday walkabout this morning, and I realized that I did not share with you our big surprise at the end, and actually it's a twofer. So this coming Monday, I believe it's at 11 Central Standard Time, but we'll provide you with all of the details. I'm going to be doing a YouTube Live with none other than Klaus Dalby. He is just an incredible, well, one of the most talented individuals on the face of the planet, in my opinion, and I can't wait to talk with him about his take on cottage gardening in his home of Denmark, and all sorts of things. And then unbelievably, we're getting ready to come up on our 1000th episode, our 1000th video on this YouTube channel. I cannot believe it. And to celebrate, we're going to do a Linda Vodder Live. I believe on the Monday after that, I will share the details, but we're going to be doing lots of giveaways from some of our sponsors. So I hope you can join us. Sorry for forgetting, but in the end, I came through. You guys have a great day.